Hi, everybody. This slideshow is called the Toulmin Method of Understanding and Writing Argument. And although it is not replicated exactly in the arguing strategy chapter you read, that's located in the Norton Field Guide, it does have a lot of information on how to both read and write persuasive essays and arguments. It'll go through all of the different steps, basically taking apart and analyzing how you actually write an argument. So, what is the Toulmin method? Stephen Toulmin was a mid 20th century philosopher and logician who was not satisfied with the practical applications of ancient rhetoric in the modern classroom. Therefore, he devised a system for writing an argument that incorporates 6 steps that almost every argument must take in order to succeed. Such an argument is one that the audience will be persuaded by. And when we think about Aristotle's rhetoric and early Greek and even Roman orators and rhetoricians, they were mostly talking about oral argument. And that transcribed into written argument, and Toulmin took it a step further and created this method for understanding and breaking down all of the parts of an argument that will make it much easier for you to persuade your audience. Okay, step 1 of the Toulmin method is your claim. And the claim, so I'm highlighting the word claim here, is also your thesis. In a persuasive argument, though, in arguing a position, the claim is usually one sentence at the end of paragraph 1 that forecasts the argument for your audience, has some sort of tension or conflict, and is specific. It takes a position. Your evaluative paper also had a claim. We called it a thesis, but you did make an argument in your evaluation paper. Here, in this arguing a position paper, because you're using research and because you're getting into a lot more depth with the different reasons and evidence, I am going over this method in a lot more detail, but just think about your thesis in your evaluation essay as a kind of claim that you wrote. Step 2 of the Toulmin method combines reasons and evidence. So reasons come after the claim. They're why you are making the argument, and they support your claim. You have to have a claim first in order to have reasons. Generally, you can write each reason as support for your claim in one sentence, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Evidence is the meat of your argument. Your pieces of evidence support the reasons. So far you have a chain like this: claim to reasons to evidence. Evidence includes an assortment of things: personal experience, general cultural ideas we already know about the topic, logic or common sense, historical examples. It also includes statistics, expert testimony, facts, and research. Evidence tells the audience why they should support the individual reasons, back here, that in turn support your claim. Okay, on to step 3. Step 1 was claim. Step 2, combined reasons and evidence. And step 3 is now the warrant. And some people also call it the assumption. Some people even call it the unstated assumption, because this part of the argument is often left unstated in the argument. It's not explicitly written out. So, the warrant is a commonly accepted belief or value that is assumed within a claim. Warrants determine whether an audience will accept the argument. A warrant does not have to be stated in the essay, and it usually is not. What it is the connection between your claim and each reason you have for that claim. And so I have other slides coming up that tell us more about the warrant as the claim connected to each reason. We're still on step 3, finding the warrant. And We're going to spend a couple of slides on warrant because this is, like I said, the most challenging aspect of the Toulmin method of understanding an argument. Once again, here's the definition of a warrant. A warrant is an assumption that connects the claim with each reason utilized to support the claim. So you're writing a claim, you have your claim of your particular topic, the position that you're arguing, and then you have several reasons. You always have to have several reasons to make a paper. You just can't have one. Think of reasons in the form of because clauses attached to the claim. And remember, I had said earlier that a reason can generally be boiled down to one sentence. So I've made a little chart on the right. The chart has an example of a controversial claim. So here is the controversial claim right here. Most mothers of preschoolers should stay home with their children. That's definitely controversial. It is arguable, not factual. Many people would not agree with that. Some people would, but I'm trying to persuade people of that position. This is not necessarily the position I take personally, but it is a position that someone could take. Followed by this claim are 3 reasons that an arguer could use to support them. Remember, we can use the word because to then find the reasons. So here's reason 1, reason 2, reason 3. Reason 1 is children need undivided attention. So the claim would be most mothers of preschoolers should stay home with their children because children need undivided attention. That's reason number 1. What is assumed in the connection between these 2 things, okay? We're connecting these 2, the claim and the reason. What is assumed and not written out in the connection between most mothers of preschoolers should stay home with their children and the fact that children need undivided attention? That's not a fact, that's an argument. But what is the connection between them? The assumption that connects the claim with the reason is that mothers at home, so mothers at home, will give their children undivided attention. That's what the assumption is. It's unstated. You could put the assumption right in the middle or even right after the reason, but nobody's going to write out the assumption in an argument. If you wrote out the assumption, it would sound something like this. Most mothers of preschoolers should stay home with their children because children need undivided attention, and we have to assume that mothers at home will give their children undivided attention. Now, that sounds ridiculous. That's why we take out the assumption when we're writing out the claim, and even the reasons, because it's far too long at that point. One thing to remember, though, is that the reason is not the warrant. We're naturally going to have to find evidence to support the reason. So here's reason 1 again, children need undivided attention. The evidence, remember, evidence, facts, statistics, personal history, cultural example, expert testimony, all of that evidence goes back to this reason. Children need undivided attention. So I would have to look up information from experts, and I would have to look up statistics on what happens when preschoolers don't get undivided attention. But the warrant is saying that it's mothers who will provide that undivided attention. That's the warrant. That's the assumption. That the author of this argument is assuming that we all agree with the idea that mothers at home will give their children undivided attention. Not that just children need the undivided attention, that's the reason, but we connect it back to the claim. So let me just verbally tell you reasons 2 and 3. Reason 2, mothers are the best caregivers. Reason 3, bonding at this age is most important. And in the next slide, I'm going to talk more about reasons 2 and reason 3. Okay, this is the last slide on warrant. Remember, we're still on step 3 of the Toulmin model. We're talking about warrant here. And I've written the chart again, the exact same chart as the first page with the claim and then the reasons here. And what we would do is we would use the same format to find the warrant for reasons number 2 and number 3 as we did in the prior slide. So we would connect the claim to reason 2, we would connect the claim to reason 3. So the warrant for reason 2, first, before I tell you how I found the warrant, is I'm going to repeat the reason. Mothers are the best caregivers. Now, that is an arguable reason. We would have to find evidence that supports our assertion, our argument that mothers are the best caregivers. However, the warrant is not just that mothers are the best caregivers. That's the reason that supports the claim. What is unstated, connecting the claim that most mothers of preschoolers should stay home with their children to mothers are the best caregivers, is mothers who stay home are the best caregivers. That's what's connecting the claim about preschooler mothers staying home with the assertion that they're the best caregivers. And then reason 3, bonding at this age is most important. Similarly, the warrant is mothers who stay home bond with their children. So we're always looking back at the claim and we're finding what is unstated between the claim and the reasons, and that is the warrant. Now, why do we find this warrant? What is the importance of that? Why can't we just go claim, reasons, evidence, rebuttal, finished? Well, the next step of the Toulmin method, step 4, is what happens after the warrant and is the reason why we need to find the warrants to begin with. What happens if we must support the warrant? Essentially, what happens if our audience does not agree with one or more of the 3 warrants? So take a look at warrant 2, for instance. I've found warrant 2 is mothers who stay home are the best caregivers. Now, there could be a large segment of our audience who say no to that. They could come back with their own rebuttal and say, why can't mothers who work outside the home be the best caregivers? Why can't fathers who stay home be the best caregivers? Why can't grandmothers or babysitters be the best caregivers? What essentially makes mothers at home the best caregivers? And this leads us into step 4 of the Toulmin argument. Okay, we're now on step 4 of the Toulmin model, which is called backing. Backing is connected to each warrant, like I said in the prior slide. And you must back the warrants if the warrants are not believed by most of your audience. So what backing is essentially a second set of evidence that proves the warrant correct. Even though the warrant is unstated, we find the warrant, we actually state it, not in the essay itself, but in our thinking about the essay, particularly in thinking about our own writing. All of this is to prove our point, to argue our position, to make others believe us, to convince or persuade them to agree with us. So let's go back to the very first warrant. Remember, here was the claim, and here were the reasons. Remember, we're writing to a general audience. So what we're doing is we're sort of constructing an audience that has certain demographic characteristics. Very general. An educated audience, newspaper readers, but of all different ages, genders, social classes, different demographics, but all educated, all able to read and understand arguments, and all neutral, so perhaps able to be convinced. So what we need to ask with backing, will most of our audience agree that mothers at home will provide undivided attention? Remember, that was the first warrant. So if we determine that most of our audience does not agree, then we will have to back the warrant. If we determine that most of our audience does agree, then we will not have to spend time searching for evidence to back the warrant. So remember, this reason needs evidence. So I'm just going to write off to the side. Needs evidence. Warrant may need another set of evidence called backing. So looking at the warrants, it seems like for this particular argument, I would say that probably the third one likely will not require backing. Mothers at home will bond with their children. Remember, that's the warrant. The reason is bonding at the age of being a preschooler is most important, connecting that back to mothers staying at home. The reason of bonding at this age is most important, of course, would require some evidence. But the warrant that mothers at home will bond with their children, most people would agree to that. So I would think that that one would not need backing. Now, looking at the second one, remember the second reason is mothers are the best caregivers, and the warrant was mothers at home are the best caregivers. That one probably does need backing, because there could be research that suggests that the best caregivers are mothers who also work outside the home, and so therefore they bring their creativity and experience and selfhood of working outside the home back to caring for their preschool children. So there is a certain segment of the audience, particularly mothers who work and who like to work, who would not say that mothers at home are the best caregivers. So this one, we would have to not only get the evidence that mothers are the best caregivers, which we'll need evidence for that, but mothers at home are the best caregivers, we'd likely need another set of evidence for that. Now, the backing of the warrant doesn't need to take up a huge amount of time in your paper. We're mostly going to be convinced by the evidence you provide for your reasons. But as long as you understand the warrant for each reason and understand that you may need to back that unstated assumption in order to get more from your audience or to get more conviction from your audience, then that's a good way to think about writing an argument. Step 5 is a qualifier. And a few weeks ago, when we were talking about writing a draft and writing a thesis, the word qualifier and its definition did come up. So you've already learned about qualifier in this class, but it is step 5 of the Toulmin method. Sorry, so I'm going over it again. A qualifier is a word or phrase that qualifies the thesis. In other words, this word or phrase you choose modifies your argument slightly so that more people will be inclined to agree with you. The qualifier essentially acknowledges that other people disagree with you, and these other people may be correct in some ways about the idea, and you're essentially giving a nod to the other side with a qualifier by saying, perhaps, maybe, in most cases, probably. This is a rhetorical argument. So because it is an argument, there's not an essence of truth to it. An argument where you're persuading someone to agree with your position, by its definition, suggests that there's not a truth, that there are at least two and perhaps many different positions. So my earlier claim that I used to talk about warrant and backing had the word most as a qualifier. Most mothers of preschoolers should stay home with their children. And in doing so, the word most perhaps brings in a segment of the audience who would immediately say, what about single mothers? Or what about mothers whose husbands have lost their jobs? That way, the word most essentially says, I understand that there are circumstances where mothers with preschoolers will have to work outside the home, but that's not the majority of the circumstances. So that's qualifier, step 5. And finally, we're on step 6 of the 6-step Toulmin model. And step 6 is the rebuttal. The rebuttal is your answer to those who will argue against you. How will you respond to their questions and concerns, and what makes you correct based on your reasons and evidence, and backing of the warrants if necessary? In a rebuttal, you're acknowledging that a counter-argument exists to your argument, and then you tell the person arguing against you that they're wrong. So a rebuttal is both an acknowledgement of the other side and telling them with your own evidence why your position is the correct one. So now we've made it through all 6 steps. The final slide is a diagram of a Toulmin model. So let me stop here and go to that one. Okay, here is the claim. And the claim is Harry is a British subject. And they have evidence here, which is also reason. Remember, reason and evidence can go together. So because Harry was born in Bermuda. So the qualifier is the word presumably. Harry is presumably a British subject because Harry was born in Bermuda. So we can look at it this way. Now, the warrant right here is what's connecting the claim with that reason. So the claim that Harry is a British subject connected to the reason with Harry was born in Bermuda, the warrant is a man born in Bermuda will generally be a British subject. Again, that's the unstated assumption that doesn't have to be written out. That is assumed. And we have to determine if that warrant needs backing. Now, most people will agree to this warrant, okay? If you know geography and you know history and you know your statutes and legal provisions, then you won't have to back the warrant. But here is what would happen if you did need to back the warrant. You could find the following statutes and other legal provisions. So you could find a second set of evidence that he was born in Bermuda. The first reason is he was born in Bermuda. The evidence would be his birth certificate. Remember, they're conflating certificate. I know my handwriting's really bad, but that would be the evidence. So now, if someone disagreed with the warrant, here would be the backing. And then finally, here's the rebuttal. Well, somebody comes along and says, he's become a naturalized American. Both his parents were aliens, were undocumented. So if that's the case, and somebody comes along and says that, that's the rebuttal. And can we counter that rebuttal? Can we come back and give documentation that he hasn't become a naturalized American citizen? And if we can counter that, then we put that in our argument. So all of this, obviously, all of this part of the argument is essential. The claim may be a qualifier. You don't 100% have to have a qualifier, but certainly claim, reason, evidence. He's a British subject. He was born in Bermuda. We find the birth certificate saying he was born in Bermuda. Do we need backing of the warrant? Maybe. Do we need to counter the rebuttal? Probably, especially if enough people have questions about it. So anyway, there you go with the 6-step Toulmin model. I realize this one was very long. It's the longest one we've done this semester, but I do think it's the most complicated, and we're going to work with it in other exercises over the next couple of weeks. Okay, bye-bye.